Good evening and welcome to Dr. Kalam IAS Academy. Dear students, we'll continue our discussion. We'll go in depth as to what is ethics. In this, what are the criteria? What are the standards to take something as ethical? We'll look into those things. We'll dwell in depth with respect to those things. First and foremost, dear students, you have to understand that ethics focuses on human actions, not actions of humans. Focus of ethics is on human actions, that is called as an actus humanus, deliberate human action, not actus hominis, undeliberate action. This is said by the famous Saint Thomas Aquinas. For any action to be called as human, all the three criteria that should be done with some knowledge involved, that should be voluntary done, and freedom, all should be concurrently present. Not if one is absent, we can't say that that is human action. Then it won't be matter of concern with respect to ethics. Actions of human may not, actions of the human may not be willfully, voluntarily, consciously, or deliberately done, but all the same, they are done by humans. So here, the thing is voluntariness, consciously done, means the same things with knowledge. If they are done, they are human actions. If it is not done with respect to those things, then it is actions of human. But they are also done by humans. Here, one important distinction with respect to ethics and the law. In both the cases, the starting point is to prove whether an action is human action or not, whether an action is based on knowledge, voluntary done or freely done. Afterwards, application of law. That is the reason prosecuting lawyer always tend to say that all the actions are humans. On the other hand, defendant want to show that actions of the defendants are not humans and their dependent is not culpable. What does this imply? This implies that there are many things related to knowledge, voluntary, and freedom, like ignorance, passion, fear, violence, some temperaments, pathological status. If all these things are also present, then that is not human action. Ethics and human interference, this is the topic, the first thing, the most important, the most subjective, the most important, the whole syllabus. In this, you have got three distinct areas: human actions, values, and inculcation of values. These are some of the questions which UPSC has given. I think you have already gone through all these things. These are very, very important. You have to go through. While dealing with these things, we concluded that ethics cannot be equated to religions, feelings, laws, or the societal things, or we cannot say we don't know. But yours UPSC mentions that laws and rules and regulations are, and conscience as a source of ethical guidance. What does this mean? The answer is given by second ARC. Second ARC says that every law has the basis in ethics. The laws what we have is a reflection of what people want. The legal system emanates from the shared vision of what is good and just. So, what is the conclusion? Laws and rules have basis in ethics, but we cannot equate ethics with respect to laws. Moving forward, our thing was clear as to what is ethics. Ethics is set of standards. In this regard, these standards are placed by the society which guide our behavior, choice, and action. Most important definition. And these are everything related to ethics given by second ARC report. Then we were into what is the supreme ethical standards. We discussed that. We said that ethics, it cannot be equated to our feelings, any law, or some of the things which we in tune, which we feel, or we cannot say we don't know. But we concluded that ethics means set of standards. Then what is the basis for these standards? Which standard is the supreme? In this direction, we dealt upon the concept where ethics was located in ends, consequences, and results. That is consequentialism. The true representative of consequentialism, a very, very important thing in consequentialism is utilitarianism, given by Jeremy Bentham. Here, what is the consequence? What is the output? What is the result they are looking into? They are looking into happiness. They say that the only criteria, according to utilitarians, the only criteria has to be with respect to maximizing happiness. Because we as humans are governed by two sovereign masters. That is your pain and pleasure. Pain and pleasure are related to happiness. If pain is less and pleasure is more, then there is more happiness. All our actions are governed by pain and pleasure. Pain and pleasure, when we take as a balance, it leads to happiness. So happiness is the outcome. Happiness is the result which has to be taken into consideration according to utilitarianism. We took and we analyzed with some of the examples according to which all these things are ethical. Major objection was that here you are basing ethics on one criteria, that is happiness. But happiness cannot be right or wrong. We cannot equate happiness with what is good, what is bad, what is just. You may be happy for an unjust reason. How can you take this as a standard? How can this be supreme ethical standard? Then you defined happiness in terms of pain and pleasure, and you gave the justification that they are the sovereign masters. In fact, they are not the sovereign masters. When you are heeding to pain and pleasure, you are acting as a slave to them. These are not sovereign masters for the very reason that these things are not given by you. When you feel hungry, when you feel thirsty, you are just satisfying a biological law or a physical law. And in all these cases, you will be treating people as means. You are treating people as means very important. You are treating humanity as a means. Humanity is a very, very big thing, the ultimate thing. How can you generate something, or how can you use that as a ultimate climax or core as a means to achieve something? So it is a meaningless. And this is said by your deontologists. All these oppositions are given by your deontologists. According to them, that which treats humanity as an end, which treats people as an end, and at the same time, it is universally applicable. Dear students, one very important thing. In the ultimate analysis, if you go to the core, treating people as an end and also the law should be universally applicable means the same. If you want to test whether anything is categorical imperative or not, these two conditions should be satisfied. We'll discuss these things in detail when we take up categorical imperative. So these are the two most important things with respect to supreme ethical standard. Yet there are many other things like libertarianism, which we were discussing. Libertarian's central thing is the fundamental right to liberty. We own ourselves. So we have to be given liberty. Liberty is the most important political value. Liberty means being free to make your own choices about your life. And others should not force. Why this argument? Because we own ourselves. So others should not force us. We should be allowed to do whatever we want. That is their argument. And libertarians favors unrestricted markets. Why they favor unrestricted market? Not because of efficiency, just because of it is giving more freedom. Why libertarians are for unrestricted market? In market, you will be getting whatever you want. You will be having freedom to choose. On the other hand, libertarians are for minimal state, not a welfare state. Welfare state means it is based on the principles of equality, equitable distribution of wealth. Say, for example, your public social security and public service programs. Same time, they oppose paternalism as parents try to take the authority and responsibility of children. Why? Because in their own good. Or there also cannot be moral legislation as to saying what is good and what is bad. And also they are against redistribution of wealth or income. In this, the most important proponent of all these things is Nozick. Robert Nozick is distributive justice. According to him, there is nothing wrong in economic inequalities as such. There is nothing wrong in economic inequalities as such until and unless if there is justice in initial holding and if there is justice in transaction. If there is any injustice, then you can go for redistribution of wealth. Why? Not to bring about equality, to redress the past grievances, to redress the past wrongs. According to libertarians, taxation is equal to forced labor. Forced labor is slavery. That is denying that I own myself. Please understand the concept here. These were the things which we discussed in our previous session. Let us continue the discussion further. According to libertarians, taxation is a form of forced labor. How? Say, for example, in India, as of now, if you are getting more than 10 lakh per annum, you have to pay 30% tax. 30% tax means nearly 1/4 of the time. 1/3 you take, 1/3 of the time. Means it is equal to 4 months. If you are working 1 year and if you are getting 10 lakh, in that 4 lakhs labor in the form of tax is taken. Means a person is made to work 4 months without paying anything. Means here you are not having, you don't have any rights over the fruits of your labor. Then what is it is called? It is called slavery. So here they are denying that I own myself. That is their argument, dear students. According to them, taxation claim to our part of us. Whatever part correspond to the portion of income we must pay to support the causes. Say, for example, 30%. So self-ownership. Then please think it over. Can we allow self-ownership? But here one constraint they have themselves put. Self-ownership and they have to be allowed to do whatever they want. Means they have to be given maximum freedom. This freedom can be curtailed when it is coming in the way of others' freedom. That is the only condition. Right? So self-ownership, because of self-ownership, since we own ourselves, we should be given freedom of choice. Right? Is this the concept clear? So since we own ourselves, we should be allowed to do whatever we want. If I own my body, my life, and my person, I should be free to do whatever I want with them. Is there anyone who opposes that? It is saying that if I own my body, are you not owning your body? Definitely. We are owning our life, my person. then I should be free to do whatever I want, provided I don't harm others. I am not wearing seat belt. Am I harming anyone? No. I'm not wearing helmet. Am I harming anyone? No. So I should be here. On the other hand, I am drunk and I am driving. I am harming others. You can prohibit that. Self-ownership is the foundation of individual rights. The idea that I belong to myself, not to the state or the political committee. Is this clear? So the crux of libertarian things, the basis of, see, in case of utilitarianism, what was their basis? Is happiness. Happiness is founded on pain and pleasure. Here they are founding their thesis, libertarians, on in place of happiness, what they are asking for? They are asking for freedom. They are asking for liberty. Why? What is the reason? Here, pain and pleasure. Here the reason is, I own myself. I belong to myself. My body is mine. The fruits of my work are to be in my hands. Then, dear students, think it over. If that is the case, is it correct if the law punishes adultery? Is it correct? Think it over. Law punishes adultery means, say for example, I have married a woman, but I am having many sexual relations with many people. Can state punish for me? There is no force there. I'm not exploiting in my extramarital relation or adulterous relations. It is based on mutual consent. Both are happy. We have got liberty. Then can state say like that? Going forward, say for example, can state say that living in relations are not good? In the same line, prostitution. What is wrong if two adult individuals are meeting based on their consent? Can state punish for prostitution? Can state punish for homosexuality? Because who are you to say that only heterosex is the one which you have to follow? I own myself. I own my body. So I should be given choice. Selling of kidney in most of the countries, organ donation is regulated for many reasons. But this kidney is mine. What is wrong if I sell my kidney? Is there any problem? Who are you to say that you cannot sell your kidney? Then, okay, one kidney, okay. These two kidneys are mine. So I will sell both the kidneys. This is the argument of libertarians. On the other hand, right to suicide. This body is mine. This life is mine. I'm not finding it pleasant on this earth because of many reasons. So I want to end my life. What is state's problem? How can they fund? And suicide, my dear students, is not that easy. So I want to take assisted suicide so that I will ask someone, come and give an injection so that I will drive peacefully. I don't want to like be a burden to the society after I become 60. As aging and senescence begins. What is the problem if we have consensual cannibalism? If someone want to eat a human and another is willing to give his flesh, what is the problem then? Dear students, in all these things, what are the objections you would like to raise? Let me know. Let me know the objections to all these things. So think that I am a libertarian. I say that all these things are the things related to my self-ownership. So state should not punish and also should not regulate. Can anyone say justifying the things? that adultery should be prohibited, punished, prostitution should be. What are the reasons for that? Anyone? These are the important things. They are the applied things. The addition, maybe with respect to euthanasia, maybe with respect to surrogacy, maybe with respect to abortion. What is the central tenet? Central tenet is libertarianism. Central argument is that I own myself. The body what I have, the things what I have earned are legally mine, and nobody has right to decide on these things. This is about libertarian. Then moving forward, there is one more important thing. See, I explained the things. You are an individual. In this, there are some means through which you are achieving your ends. Here, some say that ethics is located in means. They're not at all concerned. It's like a dichotomy with other things, no other thing. Some say that ethics is located in ends. Others say that no, ethics is located in freedom. Ethics is located in liberty. The same parallels, a lot of similarities is the virtuous theory, which locates ethics in virtues. Ancient theories of justice started with virtues, while the modern theory started with freedom. Ancient theories used to say that, say for example, killing is bad, being compassionate is good. These are the virtues which should be present in an individual. Modern theories in the same parallels say that freedom is the thing which you have to consider. Let us delve upon to this concept, that is virtuous theory. What is this virtuous theory in fact? Let us understand this with an example. We have seen the example of price gouging. In Uttarakhand, when there was a natural disaster, one parota was sold for 500 rupees. Then we had two arguments, like this is a bad one and this is okay, not a bad one. Because this is acting according to the market, demand and supply. There's nothing wrong here. In this case, there was what is known as price gouging, that is taking exorbitantly high prices. In this regard, the shopkeeper is putting high price. Greed is a vice, a bad way of being, especially when it makes people oblivious to the suffering of others. More than the personal vice, it is an odds with the social virtue. In the times of trouble, a good society pulls together rather than presses for maximum advantage. People look out for one another. A society in which people exploit their neighbors for financial gain in times of crisis is not a good society. Excessive greed is therefore a vice that a good society should discourage if it can. So, it is propounding a thing, what is known as virtue. Whether price gouging is ethical or not, it says that price gouging is not virtuous, because greed is a vice opposite of virtue. When we are suffering, when we are in trouble, we look for help. What if the person towards whom I am looking to is trying to exploit me? When I'm not feeling well, when I'm in a very bad situation, I'll be in a very helpless situation, hopeless situation. If someone want to exploit this, then what is the moral fabric of the society? In this regard, we cannot say that everything is related and should be determined by market, where goods supply is determined by supply and demand. Society in which people exploit their neighbors for financial gain in times of crisis is not a good society. Don't you feel this is a one which we have to oppose? Then there is a problem with respect to this also. Greed is a vice that the state should discourage. But who is to judge what is virtue and what is vice? Who is to decide that a parota which was being sold previously for, say for example, 50 rupees, at the time of a disaster, it should be sold only for 50, or you can increase another 50. Who decides that? And isn't it dangerous to impose judgment about the virtue through law? Don't you think like what you are doing, if the law determines whether it's good or not? Say for example, marrying, today they come up with a law and they say that only you have to marry only the people from your caste. Or going further, they say that you have to marry only your cousins. Or if the law says that you can't marry outside your religion, if you marry anyone outside the religion, that is false. That is bad. You'll be punished. So that is the reason many people hold that government should be neutral on matters of virtue and vice. It should not try to cultivate good attitudes or discourage the bad ones. Here you can find some similarities with virtuous theory and the rights theory, libertarians theory. In this case, they are talking about virtues. On the other hand, in that case, we are talking about human freedom. Here, what is the thing? Virtue, state will decide what is virtue, what is vice. Then it becomes very, very difficult because it curtails your freedoms. So virtuous theory, in fact, was propounded way back, long back. It's one of the oldest theories. According to virtuous theory, a truly moral person is a virtuous person. According to these things, a virtuous person is the only moral person, only the ethical person. Virtue can be defined as an excellence of characters which leads one to act in a morally trustworthy manner. Dear students, according to this, virtue is an excellence of the character which leads one to act in a morally praiseworthy manner. So what is virtue? Virtue is a character which leads you to act according to some of the things, which leads to the agreement in the society, praised by the everyone. A person who possesses the virtues like kindness will behave kindly towards others. He will not act kindly. A person who is having a virtue like kindness will not act kindly because he thinks that it is its duty. That is your deontology. He is not acting kindly because of his duty to do so, or because he calculates that acting kindly will maximum the total utility, the consequentialist or utilitarian theory. Why this person is acting kindly? He acts kindly because he possesses the virtue of kindness. Are you getting the point, my dear students? Here they are giving more importance to some virtue, some good thing, which is praiseworthy, an excellence of character. If you have that one, definitely you will be following your duty, and definitely it will be maximizing the utility, but he is not acting for those things. Is it clear? According to this, a person who possesses the virtue of kindness will behave kindly towards others. He will not act kindly because he thinks that it is his duty to do, or because he calculates that acting kindly will maximize the total utility in the society. Means they are saying that a person who is treating others kindly is not treating others kindly because it is duty, that is deontology, or not because of your utilitarianism, because it maximizes utility. He acts kindly because he possesses the virtue of kindness. According to virtuous ethics, truly moral person is a virtuous person. He has internalized virtues and has a moral character. Dear students, I hope you have taken the slides of all these things. I have given the slides for you. Since to cover more facts, I'll be going little fast with reduction in the explanation, also because to reduce the confusion. Now I want to build the concrete topics first. Afterwards, we'll discuss each and every angle. Because if you start discussing with respect to positive, negative, all these things now, you will get confused. So according to virtuous ethics, it focuses on inherent character of a person, what a person has. Claims that a lifetime of practice of these virtues leads to ethical life. A person, if he follows kindness, courage, this leads to ethical life. There is no need for you to think about means or the ends. Just have some virtues, have a good character. Then you may ask me, like, how to determine what is ethical, what is unethical from virtuous point of view. It teaches that an action is right if and only if it is an action that a virtuous person would do. Say, for example, I am a virtuous person. I have got kindness. What I will do in a circumstance is what is ethical. For others to be called as ethical, in a given circumstance, they have to do same thing. Say, for example, Shivaji Maharaj, he has a virtue of courage. In a given situation, he is doing some act. So others also do the same thing to be said to be having the virtue of courage. Here, as I told you, these were the things which were propounded way back thousands of years back. Aristotle is regarded as a systematic proponent of virtuous theory, but Plato has also given cardinal virtues. Like they are very, very like superficial, in fact, when compared to Aristotle. Aristotle was the first person to make systematic encounters with these things. So cardinal virtues, according to Plato, the cardinal virtues are wisdom, means acting with reason. You are acting prudently. You are acting with knowledge. Courage means mental or moral strength to withstand the difficulty. Temperance, discipline, biological appetites. Justice, harmonious functioning of all these things. So, dear students, don't take these things like as the universal things. These are the things according to Plato. According to him, these are the virtues. So they have to be present in an individual. If there is wisdom, if there is courage, if there is temperament, temperance, if there is justice, then those acts can be called as ethical. So as of now, we have discussed four important things as the basis of supreme ethical standard. Moving forward in the same direction, the contract. We have discussed about contract. Here we took up an example where there is a old lady and a painter. Old lady and painter, they made a contract for painting for 10,000 rupees. But afterwards, old lady found that the real value of this is only 5,000. Here, contractual theory is the one of the basic thing, because we are living in a society. When we are interacting with others, we made some reciprocal things, we made some contract. But there are times when these contracts are not ethical. But contracts will be ethical when it is done within a fair way. Before we go into those things, why do we now have contract? What is the need of contract theory? Social contract theory. According to Thomas Hobbes, society without rules is equal to living in a state of nature. Please understand here, society without rules, society without any ethical standards is living in a state of nature, like the monkeys in the forest. Life in the state of nature would be Darwinian, where stronger survive and the weaker perish. Survival of the fittest. What the strong will do? Strong will may kill the weak. In the social contract theory, there is a very, very important thing, my dear students. What is that? Individuals have consented to surrender some of their freedoms and submit to the authority in exchange for protection of their remaining rights or maintenance of social order. Please internalize the things. Please connect this with our libertarian things. Libertarians were for freedom. For freedom. That was their basis. But here we are talking about one thing where individuals are willingly giving up their liberty, willingly giving up their freedom. Why? They want to have other things. Here, individuals have consented, they are not been forced. Taxation, everybody might have not accepted. But in social contract theory, individuals have consented to surround some of their freedoms, liberty, and submit to the authority in exchange for protection of their remaining rights or maintenance of the social order. See, if this is the total number of freedom, what we have, here we are surrendering a part of this to the authority, maybe government, maybe a king. Why? To reap all these other things, all other things. By giving up some freedom, we are getting all other freedom, all other freedoms. This freedom we can avail easily. A society in the state of nature would be without comforts and necessities. Why? Why people are giving up part of their freedom? I repeat, why in social contract theory, why people are willingly with consent, they are trying to give part of their freedom because they want to enjoy the rest of them. Is this logical? What is the basis? What is the logic to say this? If we don't have any laws or some things which govern the society, a society in the state of nature would be without comforts and necessities. You may think that if one individual is given full freedom to do, say for example, you feel that I'm restricted here because of corona, that these things, I want freedom, I want to go. But in reality, it is not the thing. When you are given full freedom, you won't be having the comforts and necessities because there is no concept of leisure. There is no security, always the continual fear. Say, for example, there are 3 agriculture communities. You don't know when a community A will attack E, when E will attack B. They don't have security. And they don't have leisure because you can't think of leisure. If you are in leisure, someone may attack you. When there is no peace and prosperity, when there is no security, when there is always fear, when there is no leisure, then there won't be any place for commerce, because you are behind fulfilling your basic needs, hunger, thirst. Because of this thing, when you are living in the state of nature with no leisure, security, or continuous fear, there will also be no culture at all. You can't progress with the knowledge, no art, no language. In the state of nature, you'll be having full freedom. But at the same time, you won't be having the comforts and necessities which are required. Dear students, state of nature where rules and laws are not existent. People will strive for more wealth, power in what could be described as a dog-eat-dog society. When there is no rules and regulation, why you are not beating someone? Why you are not killing someone? Because you are not staying in state of nature. Say, for example, there is a disagreement between wife and husband. Husband is biologically, for some reasons, he is stronger. Can he beat the wife? This is what happens in the state of nature. We are not animals. We are not living in the state of nature. People will act in wicked ways to survive, including attacking on others before they are attacked themselves. There is no peace. There is no trust. Survival of the fittest. They always are thinking about survival. They are not thinking about leisure, commerce, art, development of language. Because their first basic thing itself is not fulfilled. Strong it would control the weak, and also society would have no rules or laws forbidding or discouraging unethical and immoral behaviors. So these were the things in the state of nature. Means when there is no rules and regulation, when there is no rules and regulation in the society, then this will happen. So what is the answer for this? How can a society be ethical? See, for example, there is a society where the strong will beat the weak, will kill the weak, will exploit the weak. And also the strong is also not secure. He is afraid someday someone will come and attack me. So you want to attack first before that. So what is the solution? We are not living in a state of nature like animals. Then what is the solution for this? The solution is social contract, my dear students. What do you understand by social contract then? Dear students, social contract, it is in everyone's interest to enforce rules that secure safety and security for everyone, even the weakest. Here, everyone's needs are taken into consideration. We are obeying to some rules. Some rules are enforced. It is in everyone's interest, even the strongest, even the weakest. Here in social contract theory, what you are doing, you are giving consent to follow some rules and regulations. By this, what you are doing, you are submitting to an authority. Because by consenting, you are submitting your authority, you are just forgiving some 2 or 3 freedoms. At the same time, for this reduction in freedom, you are getting security, other freedoms, other rights you can enjoy. It dictates that we will not break the laws or certain moral codes, and in exchange, we reap the benefits of society, namely security, survival, education, and other necessities needed to live. So we have to follow social contract theory. Without social contract theory, there won't be security, there won't be survival, education, and other basic needs are also not being fulfilled, dear students. Then you may ask me, okay, this is good. Don't it have any problems, any limitations? Yes, there is a limitation. To what extent are these contracts ethical? The morality of the contracts derive their moral force from two different ideals, autonomy and reciprocity. Please concentrate here. This will explain the limitations in a beautiful way. Here, why we are saying contracts are ethical, why we say that contracts are moral, because it is based on two things. One is autonomy and another is reciprocity. What is this autonomy? Means here you are doing whatever you want with liberty, with freedom. Is it clear? The old lady and the painter had a contract based on mutual consent, and they are autonomous things. Old lady and painter, they agreed. There was no force, and also there was reciprocity. Old lady was giving money and the painter was painting. But the students, main thing here, see, with respect to all contracts, you can make this. Please understand the concept. What is the problem with contract theory? What is the problem with a philosophy which says that contracts are the supreme ethical standards? Contracts may be supreme ethical standards if they have full autonomy and reciprocity. Means both should be fully free, voluntarily done, and there should be reciprocity equally. Then the problem arises with respect to knowledge, with respect to some know-how. But most actual contracts fall short of these ideas. What are these? If I am up against someone with a superior bargaining position, my agreement may not be wholly voluntary, but pressured or in extreme cases coerced. This bargaining power may be anything. Say, for example, Uttarakhand. In this case, the seller, shopkeeper has a higher, superior bargaining power because there was more demand, but supply was very, very less. I agreed to pay 500 rupees to a parota. My agreement may not be fully voluntarily. Sometimes there may be coercion also. If I am negotiating with someone with greater knowledge of the things we are exchanging, the deal may not be mutually beneficial. In extreme cases, it may be frauded or deceived. So here the problem comes with respect to these things. Reciprocity may not be equal, and also there may not be autonomy. There may be some force. Since who is having a better bargaining power, this bargaining power may be anything, power, position, anything, and there won't be reciprocity, won't be equal, because one who has more knowledge will be in a position to exploit. Say, for example, the case of old woman and the painter. Painter had the full knowledge. If the woman would have said that no, I will give only 1,000, painter would have not agreed, because you know that if you go out to other place, they are giving 5,000. These are the limitations. Not only that, in contractual theory, it gives the authority. What is happening in contract theory? We are with consent, we are surrendering some of our freedom, some of our liberty are surrendered to an authority. This what guarantee that this authority won't do the things in a perfect way? Say, for example, government. When you are giving government too much power to make laws under the disguise of protection of the public, most stringent laws, the person who is in authority may misuse the authority, may exploit you. Contracts may be unfair for some. For example, the poor do not get the same benefits of the contract. Say, for example, why we have constitution? Constitution is a social contract theory. We all have agreed upon that we will follow some of the ideals, like the things given in our preamble, liberty, equality, fraternity, anything. We have agreed, we have consented willingly for constitution. But is the poor and the rich getting the benefits equally? No. Yes, students, these are some of the problems with respect to these things. Dear students, I would let you know, like if you have any doubt with respect to these things which we have discussed. If you have any doubts with respect to these concepts, please let me know. Okay, we'll move forward and we'll take up some of the most important things which are given by second ARC also. Ethical framework. What are these things here? For any behavior, there has to be some framework. What is this? According to second ARC, any framework of ethical behavior must include the following elements. That is codifying ethical norms and practices. So, any framework for ethical behavior, if you are suggesting any ethical standard, that ethical standard must include all those things. What is that? Codifying the ethical norms and practices. It has to codify what is good, what is bad, what are the things permissible. Afterwards, disclosing the personal interest to avoid conflict between the public interest and the personal gain. This second ARC has given mainly with respect to the professional life, but it holds true in the general case also. Disclosing the personal interest to avoid conflict between the public interest and personal gains. Say, what is this? Say, for example, you are a judge. There is a case. There is a case involved in that one of the party concerned is your son. So what should you do in this case? So disclosing the personal interest to avoid conflict between the public interest and personal gains. Here, there is a personal gain with respect to the son. And also, keeping justice is one of the important things from public interest. To avoid these things, you have to disclose the personal interest. That you have to say that judge should say, before you take up the case, you should say that my son is involved in this case. Creating a mechanism for enforcing the relevant codes. So not only just codifying the things, you have to come up with the mechanisms to enforce these codes. Otherwise, it will be useless. Constitution is already written. What if you don't have any mechanism to enforce this constitution? Constitution, nothing but codifying the norms and practices. And there has to be a mechanism to enforce this also. Providing norms for qualifying and disqualifying a public functionary from the office. So here you have to be specific with respect to what are the norms, what are the things which will qualify or disqualify a public functionary from the office. These things should be the basis when you are suggesting ethical framework in a professional life, according to second ARC. According to second ARC, the crux of ethical behavior does not lie in bold words or the expression enshrined as ethical standards. So, the crux of ethical behavior is not in ethical standards. Please give full attention here. This is a very conceptual one. The crux of ethical behavior is not there in ethical standards, but the crux of ethical behavior lies in adaptation of ethical standards in action. What do you call adoption of ethical standards into actions? We call this as integrity. So how to bring about ethical behavior in the society? If you have ethical standards, it is not enough. These ethical standards should be put into action. Means people should have integrity. People should have integrity. And also the crux of ethical behavior lies in sanction against the violation of ethical standards. See here, concentrate. Let me clear the things for you. Crux of ethical behavior, how to bring about ethical behavior. First and foremost criteria is ethical standards. But these ethical standards is not enough. They have to be adopted into actions. Means people should follow them. People should follow means there should be integrity in the society. When people follow the ethical standard, we say that there is integrity. And also, if these ethical standards are violated, there should be sanctions, there should be punishments for those who violates them. And the crux of ethical behavior lies in putting in place competent disciplinary bodies to investigate allegations of ethical standards violating and impose sanctions quickly, and in promoting a culture of integrity. The students, very, very important. One is they have to put into action. Second one is if there is any violation, there should be sanction. Not only that, there is also one. There has to be one individual, one institution or body which investigates. This is the case when violation is proved. How will you prove that? There should be competent person to investigate the allegations for violating, so that they can be brought to book. And ethical standards should be followed, and there will be promoting a culture of unity. The crux of the ethical behavior lies in promoting a culture of integrity. Very, very meaningful sentence. Fourth one, what do you understand by promoting a culture of integrity? Promoting, you know, what is culture? Culture is that which is passed on from one generation to the another generation. Culture is that which is learned. Culture is that which is accepted by most members of the family. The three important things. Crux of the ethical behavior lies in promoting a culture of integrity. What is this integrity? Integrity means following ethical standards, adopting ethical standards. This adopting ethical standard should be made part of culture. Promoting a culture of integrity means, what do you mean by this statement? Integrity means following ethical standards. Following ethical standard should be passed down from one generation to another generation. Following ethical standard should be taught, should be learned, should be taught by the others, and most members should accept this. The crux of ethical behavior does not lie in the bold words and expression enshrined as ethical standards. The main thing is their adoption to ethical standards, and if there is any violation, sanctions to those things, and in putting in place competent disciplinary bodies to investigate allegations of ethical standard violations. This is clear. See, dear students, I'm giving the PDF of all these things. Go home, read them. They are very, very conceptual. I feel if you don't read like minimum 3 to 4 times what I have said, it is very, very difficult for you to assimilate, because these things are very, very subjective, right? So these are some of the things we discussed. Any doubt with respect to these things? Let me brief you as to what we have discussed so far. Dear students, values. Values are all encompassing. Values are abstract. Values are not tied to any object. When values are in the form of standards, when there are values means anything which is important to anyone's society, individual, organization. If it is important, then it becomes the value. There are some values which are in the form of standards. There are some values which are in the form of standards or principles. We call them as values or morals. When did you get this? So values and morals are part of your ethics and morals are part of your values. There may be some values like beauty. There is nothing with respect to those standards. Not only that, value is all encompassing. Your ethics and morals are part of that. Those values which are in the form of standards, which say what is right, what is wrong, what is just, what is unjust, are taken as ethics and morals. When these are practiced, when these values, when I say values, it includes ethics also. When they are practiced, it leads to your integrity. When these are practiced at the professional level, in government organizations, or in public place, then it is known as probity. Based on these values, when you are tying these values, to some objects, what you are doing, you are evaluating the things. When you are evaluating the things, that is your attitude. Here, they are tied to an object. These evaluative judgments have knowledge part, have feeling part, and also the behavioral component. Right? So this is the whole with respect to the values, ethics, morals, integrity, probity, attitude. Then we defined ethics as set of standards or set of principles. Afterwards, we went on searching as to what are these standards? What is the basis for these standards? You are an individual. You are doing some work. If ethics, you say that ethics is located in the means, rights, duties, then that is deontology. If you say that ethics is located in the consequence, then it is consequentialism. Ethics is related to the freedom, then libertarian. When ethics is related to the conduct, the virtues, what you have, this is virtues. When ethics is dependent on the contract you made with the other people in the society, then it is contractual. These are the standards which are the basis of ethics. Ethics is not religion, not feeling, not law. Then what is ethics? Ethics is one which is based on these standards. Right? So these are the things in brief with respect to the things which I have thought. So moving forward, I would like any of you to answer this question again. Anyone willing to answer this? Anyone of the four? Okay, let me zero down the question to one. What do you understand by foundational values? Or what do you understand by civil service values?
Hello, sir.
Please.
Sir, according to me, the foundational values are the values which will be expected by the people, because civil services are the service which we had to deal with the public and the decisions of the public. Hence, the foundational values will be the values which will be expected from the expected by the people from the civil servants.
Very good, madam. Almost you have hit on the bullseye. Almost there is nothing for me to explain. Correct? If you know this, you are like having a very good knowledge. In fact, this is the one which is confused by most. Values are the things which are important. If it is important for society, it becomes societal values, individual value. If it is important for civil service and civil servant, it becomes civil service value. These civil service values are those values which are expected by the citizens from the civil servants. Because here citizen is the master. So my dear students, in foundational values or in values for civil service, you think it over and give a deep think as to what you expect from a civil servant. Say, for example, a police, what do you expect from him? A collector, what do you expect from him? All these things you can write, my dear students. Right? But all other things are self-explanatory. But let me just brief these things. Here, dear students, for a while, what I want to do is we have to come up with more number of ideas, more number of options, especially for the questions which I will be discussing with respect to the essay. Today, I will give a like a brief thing as to how to write the essay also. Okay. What do you understand by attitude and aptitude? Attitude, it is an inborn, it is an innate,
Sir,
it is a genetical character. Sorry. This is attitude. I was saying for aptitude, in fact. So aptitude is innate, inborn, and it is related to work. It is related to work. Aptitude plus practice is equal to ability. It is the future potential. Dear students, if there is anything which is like putting the odd man out in your syllabus, means it will be aptitude, because it is directly related to your biology, your genetics. All other things are societal, learned kind of things. Aptitude is not learned. Skills are learned. Intelligence is not related to work. Aptitude is related to work. On the other hand, attitude is when you tie your values, to anything, any object, when you tie your values to any object, you are evaluating this. This is your attitude. My dear students, some of you have confused with respect to the second one. Values, are they static or dynamic? The answer, there is a clear-cut answer. They are neither static, they are neither dynamic. They are relatively permanent. They are relatively permanent because these are the foundation of our character. We want to have others identify us as a person with stable character. Stable character means stable values. And the value systems what we have, for that to develop, we have taken a lot of pain. And when we change the values, there will be imbalance. And as human beings, we also resist change. This is the reason why values are relatively permanent. This should be the thing. Values are not static. Values are not dynamic. They are relatively permanent. Means they change very, very slow. Why they change very, very slow? They are part of our character. We want everyone to have stable character. Why? It is easy for you to interact with them and also for others to interact with you. Then with respect to what do you understand by values and ethics, I've explained you. Values are those which are important for society, all these things. Values which are in the form of standards or principles which say what is right, what is wrong, what is just, what is unjust, are ethics. So if this is your ethics, this is your values. Right? These are some of the things. Then moving forward to yesterday's assignment which I gave. Would anyone like to explain yesterday's essay? Because after that, I will be telling how to write the essay by taking a very important example.
Hello, sir.
Madam, please be a little louder, madam.
Sir, could you hear me?
Okay.
Sir, according to the meaning of patriarchy, it is the power which lies in the men of the family or any organization or any society. According to definition, that is the meaning of patriarchy. When we consider the question, that is patriarchy is least noticed at most significant structure of social inequality. I would like to explain with an example. When we consider our daily life or our families, the total power will be laid within the head of the family. Let us consider that maybe our grandpa or maybe our father. And the decisions which will be taken by the head of the family, that is who is obviously a man. For example, if a women's that are present in the family, like daughters or wives or some other relations, they need to take the permission from the head of the family to execute that decisions. In this, we can observe that whenever they are executing their decisions, directly or indirectly, they means they are influenced by the power of the man which is held in the head of the family. Hence, by this simple example, we can confirm that indirectly or directly, this patriarchy is affecting the basic rights and basic authorities of the women which is present in the family. So we can say that uh, in from long since long years ago, it is habituated in our society that uh, head of the family or the power of the family should lie in the hands of the men itself. If we deviate it, they consider it as some discrimination, or they are overbeating the rules and regulations of the family. And it is already habituated in the society norms and conditions. So as the people are habituated for these conditions, they are least noticing that they are not accessing their basic needs and powers. That's it.
Very good, madam. Well tried. But it needs a fine tuning. We'll come to know. Anyone? Next. Anyone like to answer Pawan, where are you? Okay. No one? Okay. Let me, like Madam told the things, but there is a need of little modification. Before that, I would like to explain you how to write an essay. Dear students, here I will give you like the structure, body, introduction, what to write, what not to write. But before that, I want to develop the concept. You first develop the concept. Structure is just a matter of some 30 minutes, 40 minutes. Then you can fit into those things. First of all, you have to understand the question. You have to understand the question. Let me explain this with a practical thing which I have faced. In 2008 or so, I got 130 marks out of 200 for essay. Then we used to write only one essay. Means if you take conversions for 250, it will be somewhere like 150 marks, you can say. What was that essay? The essay I wrote was SEZ, Special Economic Zones, or Boon, or Bain. They are boon, are they helpful, are they beneficial, or are they limitations? Bain. This was the thing. So how I answered was that first I explained special. What is special? Economic. What is economic in SEZs? Zones. Why are they called zones? So what I did is I just explained what is special in special economic zones. What is economical in special economic zone? And why are they called zones? Let me tell you what exactly are special economic zones. See, for example, you consider this as India. You consider this as India or any country. Consider this as SEZs, economics. One thing is all the laws, all the rules, all the regulations which are applied to the entire India are not applied to this zone. With respect to maybe with respect to labor, there are many exceptions. It is like a zone where there are special rules and regulations. So they are special because they have got a lot of flexibility in rules, regulations, lot of incentives which are not available to rest of the country, rest of the people, rest of the entrepreneurs. Then this is special. What is economical here? Since you are providing all the products through which goods are produced, land, labor, money, capital, electricity, everything needed, when you are providing them due to the discounts you are giving, subsidies you are giving, the special facilities you are giving, here the production of the things is economical. The production of the thing is economical because of scale, production of large number. Say for example, in China, why China is able to produce goods and supply to the whole world. In fact, almost there is no home. There is no home in India which is not having Chinese products now. Just think over. Even in the remote Adivasi areas, you find Chinese products now. All these things happen just because of special economic zone. India was somehow the pioneer and it was the first one to set up special economic zone in Surat. But in China, your special economic zones are vast, like continuously some 70 to 80 kilometers stretch, only factories. So first you have to explain what is there, what is special, what is economic, why they are called zones. Next, how they are helpful, how they are disadvantageous. All the things with respect to attracting the investment, with respect to attracting the technology, with respect to exchange of goods and services with other countries, with respect to taking advantage of world trade, liberalization, globalization, privatization is the order of the day. On the other hand, how it is been. Recently, then it was the controversy because of acquiring lands. If there is transparency, if the farmers are properly compensated, those are very, very limited things with respect to disadvantage. So I just wrote these things and I concluded saying that there is a new world order where liberalization, privatization, globalization, and where world trade is inevitable. If India want to have the fruits of this liberalization, of this world trade, like China, India has to go for special economic zones. At the same time, it should see that the rights of the weak, vulnerable are not transgressed. Since I wrote this long back, this was the whole crux of the thing, which I just wrote. So similarly, what I expect, what is that it is expected here? Patriarchy, like has explained, very nicely explained, patriarchy. You just write what is patriarchy. Is least noticed. You say why it is least noticed, how it is least noticed. Yet patriarchy is least noticed, but most significant structure of social inequality. Though it is least noticed, it is one of the most significant structure of social inequality. What are the other structures of social inequality? What are the other ways where you have got social inequality? Maybe casteism. When you take casteism, it is one of the most important form of social inequality, but it is noticed. So this is the way you have to approach. Many of you have not written this one. What I expect is come up with as many views as possible. This is the framework. I have given the framework. So I request you, all of you, and please write on this one, especially those who are writing in 2022. Next, let us just take up another thing in the same example. Here, there can be no social justice. There can be no social justice without economic prosperity. But economic prosperity without social justice is meaningless. Would anyone like to answer this? Like instantaneously, what is coming to your mind? Okay, let me give you an example to you. Economic prosperity, social justice. These are the two things which they have taken. Let us take the example of an individual. Yeah, example of an individual. two parts of him. One is he is economically very, very poor. Economically very, very poor. The other is economically very, very prosperous. Right? Economically poor and economically prosperous. So for a better understanding, let us take vulnerable sections of the society like SC, ST, or women, or like differently abled people. So in this case, you have got money, you don't have money. Let us add two more dimensions to this. One is your status, societal status. Your things in society, justice means fairness. The society is fair. Here, the society is unfair. Means there is no justice. So, not exactly the thing, will zero down to one thing. Say, for example, you are in a caste system where you are looked upon very badly. You are in the bottom of the social structure. On the other hand, you are at the height of the social structure. Again, added to this, we'll have the same. You have got economically very weak. Another criteria is here, socially also you are very, very in the bottom. This is the second case. If you take the other thing, superimposing on that, with low economic status, think that you have got more like higher ladder in the society. Say for example, Brahmins. Brahmins are in the economic social hierarchy, but some Brahmins are poor. Similarly, there can also be the case where economic prosperity is very high. On the other hand, socially they are looked upon. There is no justice in the society. Let us superimpose these things with respect to some of the concepts which you already know. And also here most of the students what I have seen is they are restricting the whole debate with respect to social and economic aspect itself. But there is another dimension also, that is political. There should be political empowerment, political prosperity. There should be economic things, and also there has to be social things. That is the reason all these things are being given in our constitution. I repeat, dear students, all these things are given in our constitution. Political rights are given in the form of fundamental rights. Economic are also important. They are given in your directive principles of state policy. Social things are also given in your directive principles of state policy. For the all-round development of an individual, all these things are important. Say, for example, I am a Dalit man. Because of something, I am economically very prosperous. But in the social thing, I am very low. There is no justice in the society where I am living. And can you think of empowerment of any Dalit or any woman without money? At the same time, can you think like you are having money, you are having high social status also, you are not having the authority, the political things. So dear students, the crux here is there can be no social justice without economic prosperity, that is true. But economic prosperity without social justice is meaningless. Along with that, we should also bring about the political dimension. Dear students, what I expect is from you with respect to these two. I don't want some stories, some flowery language or anything. Come up with maximum example. Don't try to Google the things or anything like that. Give your brain to think. You have to work on these things. After you work, I will provide you what is the exact structure in which you have to write. If I say in the beginning itself, your thought, your logic will be aligned with my own thing. I expect you and I believe that you can think and you can come up with a better essay than what I am teaching. So, dear students, on Monday, I expect you all to answer these two. Please take due attention. What I expect you is to come up with more number of points, more number of dimensions. When you have this one, number one is that your decision making will increase. This is the crux of decision making, which is the core of your ethics paper. Why? When you have got more options, making decision is easy. Say, for example, if you want to take a decision, in your brain, you have got only two options. Do you think this is better, or there's the same decision making situation where you have got 10 views? Based on the standard, based on the need, we can just pick up from these things. So you have to train your brain to come up with more angles, whether it is good or bad. These are the things I wish you all to do. Dear students, so homework for the next 2 days is these two. Please answer these things and please submit to the number which I have given you. So to this number, you please send in. After you writing 3-4 times, I'll take up those things and I will correct, and I will give fine tuning with respect to those things. So these are some of the things which I thought of discussing today. If you have got any doubt,